So repeating or hinting a bit at what Alexander said before, stories are super important. So when I, a few years ago, wanted to start putting together a talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all these topics about AI, I was like, where do I start? What is my story? And there I stumbled upon Frankenstein. Frankenstein is like a 200-year-old book that talks about something that is still so relevant. Is the idea that we as humans design and build something that is as smart as us or even smarter than us and eventually kills us or somehow destroys us. And what I found also fascinating is that the subtitle of the novel was actually The Modern Prometheus. And the myth of Prometheus is also another super fascinating myth because it's about the dramatization of technophobia, like Patel says. What is it about? Is about the fact that humans shouldn't mess around with technology, that as humans you shouldn't be allowed to touch the fire, which is the symbol of technology back in the days, right? And that it's a message to the people that they shouldn't play around with something that is dangerous, so with technological advancement. And this sort of narrative is so embedded in the way we think and talk about technology. Even the word robot comes actually from a play of 1921, if I'm not mistaken. It's a Czech play, Russell Universal Robots, and in Czech, robot means slavery. So it was a story about this army of robots that was built to serve humanity, but eventually they revolt and they kill us all. And we see this narrative also in modern movies like 2001 Space Odyssey, again, a robot that revolts and kills humans. But what I'm asking to you today is it really rebellion what we should worry about when we talk about artificial intelligence and when we talk about smart machines or smart systems? To answer this question, first I want to take a step back and say, what are machines for us? And where do we stand versus the machines? So already back in the days, Turing is one of the inventors of the computer. Already then he said, we are not disconnected agents, but informational organisms, sharing with biological and engineered agents an informational environment. So he was already saying that computers are actually at the same level as humans, and we share a network of information, and we kind of play at the same level in that field. If we look at nowadays, this went even further because we are not anymore informational agents with the machines. Actually, the machines that we help design are influencing so much and so many of our choices every day. We decide what to listen based on an algorithm of Spotify. We decide who to date based on an algorithm. We based our routing based on an algorithm. We take a lot of decisions based on algorithms for which we don't necessarily know how they work. And this is the visible part of the story, because there is a lot of invisible algorithms that are even influencing more critical aspects of our life. I will just give some examples. This is even local examples. So the police is thinking about using an algorithm to foresee or predict criminal facts. You would say, yeah, it's maybe a good thing. They can, be more effective. But again, what scares me is like, how does the algorithm decides what would be a foreseeable criminal fact? The city of Antwerp decided also to use algorithm to detect fraud and to analyze business data to detect the businesses that do fraud. Again, questionable. It could be a very efficient way to detect fraud, but what are the criteria that are going to be used is not questioned, because again, we trust algorithms being objective. And we trust the fact that it's a machine, so it's going to give an outcome that is as objective as possible. In the Netherlands, actually, they did use an algorithm to classify people according to their potential risk of fraud. And eventually they were sued because they actually discriminated towards low-income and immigrant people, because according to their algorithm, they were by default more likely to commit fraud. So you see here already that is some sort of biases that we have as humans that we transfer kind of into the algorithm, and then we say, well, but the algorithm is objective, is a machine. So the question that I'm actually asking is, if it's not rebellion, what we should really worry about when we talk about algorithms and smart machines. Because I don't have a background in ethics and I don't know anything about ethics, then I started reading and I found this framework from Floridi and Taddeo that defines what is actually the key ethical pointers that we need to look when we talk about algorithms. The first one is very obvious, is about data. So privacy, transparency, you don't have to reuse the data that you use for an algorithm, you don't have to resell personal data. A lot of this stuff is GDPR, basically. It's like the safety of your personal data and how it is transferred or exchanged. The second aspect is the domain practice. So if you use an algorithm into the medical sector, you are going to have a deontological code of the doctors that is going to define how do you use the data and what is ethical and what is not. Again, something that is more or less defined by the specific domains. The third aspect was the most interesting to me, is basically the way the algorithm is designed and the accountability of who designs it and what are the ethical rules that are behind the decisions that are made. And so I decided to investigate a bit further into this because I find it more interesting than the other two. And when I looked at it more in detail, I found another ethics expert, Mittelstadt, that says there are two key questions that we need to ask when it comes to ethics of algorithm. The first one is, what is the logic behind? So how does the algorithm make choices? What is the evidence that they use? And I will make here some examples to explain very different type of logics and very different types of reasoning and decision makings that are used. This is a robot that is used in a parking lot in a university in the US to patrol, and a security robot. And based on how you walk, the way you behave, your physical appearance, they decide whether you are a threat or not, and they call the police. You are all laughing, rightly so. Nobody knows based exactly on what this algorithm decides that you are a threat. So in this case, we are talking about inscrutable evidence. If you would put a human making the same decision, you wouldn't know what are the criteria to make the decision. The second type of evidence is inconclusive evidence, when the evidence doesn't make sense. Again, an example in the US where unfortunately algorithms are much more used for a lot of different cases. In this case, the 2 or 3 teachers in a school were fired because the algorithm decides that they didn't do a good job. The funny thing is that some of these teachers didn't even appeal to the decision because they thought, wow, it's an algorithm, right? It's going to be right. It's just objective. And then one of the teachers said, no, wait a second. I want to understand what was the decision made of? How did the algorithm come with that decision? And then they found out that they were also including as one of the key parameters to decide whether the teacher did a good job or not, the grades of the students. But the performance of the students, it's something that the teacher has relative impact on, because of course their social background, their condition at home can define so much the way they then perform in the class. So in this case, we are talking about an algorithm that is using the wrong parameter to make a choice that is impacting someone else's job. This is even worse. These 2 people were arrested for the same crime. They had light drugs with them. Both more or less the same age, same social condition. Once they were arrested, they were asked to fill in a sort of a questionnaire, and it's an algorithm that decides how likely you are to commit the same crime. So what they call recidivism. And the person on the left was scored as high recidive, and the person on the right as low recidive. again, if we ask why that decision was made, we go and look into the data of the algorithm, the data that fed the algorithm. The algorithm was fed with historical data saying that a lot of black people get imprisoned more likely than white people. Why is that? Because they are discriminated. But of course, the algorithm doesn't know that, and it just says, black equal more willing to commit a crime or more likely to commit a crime. So the result of this is that one person gets imprisoned and stays in prison and the other gets released. So this is a bit of summary of what is the logic and the evidence and how things can go wrong behind the logic. And then there is the second question that Mittelstadt asks us to ask ourselves. What are the outcomes? What is the result of the decision of this algorithm? Also there, we have a lot of interesting surprises. There is one set of outcome that I would define as unfair outcome. When someone doesn't get a job or doesn't get a loan or doesn't get an insurance. And in this case, it's like people actually that filed the resume were screened by an algorithm, and by default, women were excluded because according to the algorithm, women and IT doesn't compute. So in this case, we are talking mainly about outcomes that, you don't get something, right? In this case, you don't get a job. It could be you don't get the insurance because you live in the poor neighborhood. It can be something transactional. The other type of outcome is what Kate Crawford calls transformative effects. Transformative effects are the way we perceive certain things, the way we shape our mental models. So a couple of years ago now, like it changed. If you Google CEO, this is the results that you get, that you were getting. Now it's different. And as you can see, it's mainly actually men, mainly white men. There is actually a woman for who can spot it. Is actually CEO Barbie. Yeah, I feel very represented. So there are these two different outcomes. One, we said unfair outcomes, and the harm that they create is a harm of allocation. So again, someone doesn't get either a job or an insurance or a loan. It's very transactional and is reduced to that specific transaction. The other one is a harm of representation. It's much more intrinsic, it's much more difficult to spot, and it refers most of the time to a group of people, to a minority, to a set of people with sharing the same criteria or category. The harms of representation is not something new. We've been always very good as humans to harm other people in this way. In the past, we were judging how much people were intelligent based on the shape of their face. Phrenology was called. It was even defined as a science. The problem is that algorithm multiplies that to a scale that is scary, and the outcomes can be also scarier. So the harm of stereotype, if we go and look into an algorithm, looks like this. An algorithm that, based on the shape of your face, defines your sexual orientation. Imagine this being used in a country where being part of the LGBTQ community is illegal. Again, nothing new. We've been always very good at excluding certain people from what we define normal. So having what they call harm of recognition. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. This is actually a card, Shirley card was called. It was a card used by Kodak to help their development labs to develop the pictures and to calibrate the color tones. And they said, to calibrate with the skin, we use this fair-skinned woman, always blonde. And what strikes me is that they call this normal, meaning that something else is not normal. And the first complaints they had was not because black people were obviously not coming into the picture, or because of producers of wood or chocolate started complaining that the dark tones on the wood wouldn't come into the picture. So we've been very good at this since a very long time, but now with algorithms, again, this reaches a scale that is unseen. Joy Bulamini, she started testing a lot of face recognition algorithm, and she actually detected that in many of them, she wouldn't be recognized unless she wears a white mask. It's most of the time because, again, the image we fed the algorithms with are image with mainly white people, sorry. And so the algorithm is not even able to recognize black faces. Another thing we've always been good at in our humanity history is denigration, using language that offends or denigrate other people. Again, with algorithms, this becomes just even more scalable and harmful. Some time ago, Google Photos was testing their algorithm to automatically detect the content of your photo and already put a label on it. So if you went to Hawaii, they would recognize Hawaii and say, oh, Hawaii, you went to Hawaii. And they automatically labeled these faces as gorillas. I don't want to make you even more miserable in this day that is even rainy. So I want to leave with a positive message. There is a way to design a Frankenstein that is human and that doesn't create any harm of representation or transformative effects. How can we do that? First of all, we need to debunk a couple of myths that we have stuck in our head. The first one is that data is neutral. When we think about data, we think about a set of things that it's there and that its data is facts. But actually, data carry with it a story. And a story most of the time of bias and already discrimination. The example that I always make for this is like the first database that was used for the first image recognition software was labeled faces in the wild, sorry. It's a database coming from Yahoo News. Of course, 70% was male and 85% was white. The algorithm would have never been able to recognize anything else if it's fed with this type of database. So if the data is not neutral, the result of the algorithm is not neutral. The second thing, and I know that this is very difficult, definitely for information architects that love categories, categories are also not neutral. So when you need to define a category that makes the basis of a decision of an algorithm, or you need to decide a categorization even on a website, you need to start questioning, why do we need gender? Why do we need race? Why are we making this category? And what is the implication of making this category? In this case, in the decision of the algorithm, what would it be, the consequence of adding this category into the system? The other big myth is actually that code is a black box. I know, yeah, you know, code, I mean, the algorithm, nobody knows what it does. It's very impossible to understand. It's like, I don't know how to decipher this. Also for that, that's not entirely true. There are a lot of guidelines, and I really refer to gov.uk, but you can find so many others online, on how to make code transparent and make the reasoning behind your algorithm transparent to everybody. If it's about something that allows you to get a loan or an insurance, why don't you explain clearly what are the criteria that the algorithm uses to make that decision, make it transparent? The other myth is that the outcomes of these algorithms are objective just because they are machine and they know best, or they use a very, sometimes it's even like the case that people think how they will have less bias than a human making a decision. Well, it's not entirely true because, again, we feed with human data the algorithm and we build the algorithm. So one of the things that we can do there is actually audit. The same way we do like testing for a software that we built. Why don't we audit the algorithm using data that is not uniform? There are even companies that do that, for example, produce fake CVs to test algorithms for recruitment to see what is the results at the end. Are there people that are discriminated because of the algorithm? So you can always create fake data to see what is the output that the algorithm gives. So this is the example of what Joey Boloamini did, and then just tested all the different image recognition software and face recognition with different faces from images of different people to see how good the algorithm was at recognizing them. The last is like, again, we are assuming that when we build something is always for a good intent and is for a good cause, and it's not excluding or harming anyone. Of course, it's like a good intent on our side as well, but we assume that there is not going to be harm with what we built. Well, that is also not entirely true. And Per Axboom, which is a super stellar but also very into this topic designer, he created this framework that he called the Inclusive Panda. And it's just a kind of a checklist for you when you design software, definitely when it comes to a software that provides a service, really trying to map who is excluded from this, who am I including, who could be potentially harmed from this, and really ask yourself those questions intentionally before you put that product into the world. This is to say that sometimes I think designers and definitely the IT world, we have a huge responsibility, I think. And quoting Thomas Wendt, which is a very nice theorist and also goes very much in depth into these topics, a sustainable future hinges on practitioners, and especially I think design practitioners' ability to choose which futures are preferable. So, like Alexander said, you are creating the story. You are imagining the future that you want to be, and you are imagining the future that you want to live in. What we introduce into the world will always have social, cultural, and ethical consequences. And sometimes when I gave this talk in the past, I have people saying, but what can I do? I'm just a designer, I'm just an engineer. And there I have also another trick. René Carmil was actually an engineer in the Nazi era period, and he actually hacked the machine that was creating punches into the identity card or the identity register to mark who was Jewish and who was not. And he did that, of course, risking his own life, and he was only an engineer. So I don't get that excuse, I'm only an engineer. You can do a lot. And yeah, this is the end. You're welcome.
I have so many questions, but I'll turn it to the audience first. Any questions for Clementina?
Yeah, in a lot of cases here, the algorithm is based on data who already existed.
Yeah.
So we a bit outsourced our responsibility to the data. But when we create from scratch an algorithm based on no data, like self-driving car with those crazy ethical concepts, is there already a way to design the algorithm in a way that there is the less bias possible?
Yeah, very good question. So there, I think you have, as you say, you are creating a data set via the first trials of the algorithm. So my suggestion would be also there, after a while, go and check your data set, see if there are patterns, see if there are bias coming out because of the way the data is collected. Because again, let's say you're using an algorithm that relies very much on face recognition. There you already know that the input that comes in might be biased towards black people, for example, so that the data set that you get is already biased at the source.
But really at first, you need to educate your AI. Are you gonna, sorry it's ugly as an example, but as a self-driving car, are you gonna smash the old lady or the baby? Someone needs to tell something at first. And how we can design a solution without just being an individual, say, yeah, let's go for the old lady.
There, the recommendation I have is, again, going back to the transparency of the code, make the decision transparent, so that if the person that is driving the car knows that the old lady is going to be the target, maybe the person that is driving can do something about it. But if he doesn't know or she doesn't know, it's going to be very difficult for that person to guess what the algorithm is going to do in that decision, and then it's going to be up to the algorithm to decide who to kill.
Talking about transparency, so I agree, if you open source the code and the data set, it makes it easier to understand why were particular decisions made. I think that one of the examples I recently heard is differentiating between huskies and wolves. People didn't understand how the fuck is it doing it, because it's apparently very hard to differentiate between both. Apparently all the wolf pictures were taken with snowy backgrounds, so it's really stupid stuff. But the example that sort of falls out of the boat is the one where you detect somebody's sexual preference based on their face.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's the data that's been fed hasn't been biased because the accuracy rate was just through the roof, which is extremely creepy. But there, the transparency doesn't help, right? So it somehow made a link between extremely complex pattern in your face and your sexual preference, which seems out of this world, but apparently are there.
Yeah.
And there's no way to make that transparent because the net is that complex that you can't reverse engineer. It's something with the eyes, for example.
But there, for me, that's why I had the two examples. One is the logic, and the other one is the outcomes, and both are important. So, like you say now, the logic is very clear. We understand why they make the decision, but the outcome is still potentially discriminating, so you still want to do that. And that is an ethical question that you need to raise. But I understand your point. It's like it's clear how they do it, or it's transparent, but that doesn't make the algorithm ethical because of that, because you need to consider both the way it works and what is the potential outcome.
It's not really a question, but I think you made a really good point when you speak about transparency, because I think that's really frightening that people sometimes forget their agency, and they say, "Oh, it's the machine's fault because the machine is built like this." Because if they assume that they screw up, it's their responsibility. And I think it's really weird because even when they are using machines, people are always saying, "Oh, I didn't do anything. It did it by itself." And well, it's very frightening to see that they prefer to give up that than being responsible with it.
Yeah, you need absolutely a sort of accountability of these algorithms.
Yeah, I might be a bit out of scope. I don't know if you looked at Midjourney, DALL-E, and Stable Diffusion for now, so the AI that people are using to create prompts, to ask them to create images, or even text or music. And for the first time of my life, it's frightening what those AI are producing. It's really frightening. There are some digital artists, in the movies that are no more calling themselves digital artists, but AI whisperer. Because they're actually creating prompts that are generating the images that they will brush slightly on Photoshop. How do you feel about those AI that might actually create algorithm of other AI actually?
Yeah, that's a meta question, of course. It's very difficult to foresee. I think the most important aspect there is, again, the AI at the source needs to have some sort of shared ethical code. There was a case, I think we were talking about it before, of a bot that was created on the internet to start tweeting random stuff, and in a few hours it became a Nazi kind of it was really disaster. So they had to put it out. The question there is, of course, like, how do you create a set of rules that can be understandable by the machine and that the machine can stick for, and how do you avoid, again, this idea of how the machine is revolting and is doing what they want. It's a very difficult, I think, again, ethical question. I don't think we should be scared of machines, but I think we should be more in control of what we teach them to do, and really have these two aspects of the logic and the outcomes always taken into account.
From what I really feel like those are less dumb AI that we've seen in the past, and that we teach them too good, actually. That because now they are really producing stuff that will be soon, already right now, really hard to differentiate from a human production than a machine production. So I think it's not about revolution, it's replacement, actually. I really feel like we are. Everybody thinks about AI, it's coming. No, it's there. It's now. They are there. So harm for me from the AI would be like everybody's replaceable tomorrow, actually. So it's quite amazing, and it's really growing fast, and I don't know how we can control that machine, actually. That's what's frightening. How we can, because we fed them, we taught them many stuff, but now they are moving further than what we thought initially, eventually. So
I will go back to this slide because I think that's for me I don't know why it's not going. Oh no, it's going too fast. That's what's happening. For me there, it's really about what is the future you are imagining. And the idea that machines do our job and that we can... Actually, there was I think it was Buckminster Fuller, an architect that even designed a city where there was the level of the play and the level of the work, and then the machines would do the work and we as humans could do the play. I signed to that actually. So I think again it depends like what type of future are we designing together, and being aware of what is the envisioning end that we are seeing. And if the end is we stop working and machines do the hard job and we just enjoy life, yes to that. But I'm not sure if that's the end goal, but again, it should be explicit and we should all go towards it.
We'll come back to the fact that human behind creating the AI will actually decide what the AI will do for us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we will conclude and move to the final kind of portion of our evening. But thank you so much. I think
You're welcome.
it's very fascinating to see how something that we've created to scale decision making really forces us to not abdicate our ability to engage in decision making. So fascinating stuff. Well, thank you all. I know we have a couple things to give our speakers before we wrap this evening. We always like to present our speakers with their lovely UX Belgium patch. So thank you for joining us. And if I could just get a round of applause for everyone who spoke tonight. Thank you all for joining us, and please feel free, have a drink, chat, and ask any other questions you might have of us or our lovely folks.
Also and join our community on Slack.
Yes.
And we also have an event in Antwerp coming up, 27th of September, if I remember correctly. So yeah, amazing speakers there as well. Feel free to join.
And as you may have noted, we do live stream. So in the event that you can't make it, you can always check us out on YouTube as well. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
We have the slides.